You walk into a room you have never visited before. Someone says something completely ordinary. The light falls across the wall in a particular way. And suddenly, something feels wrong. Not dangerous. Familiar. You know this moment. Not vaguely. For a few seconds you feel almost certain that you have already stood here, seen this, heard these exact words, experienced this exact sequence. You search your memory. Nothing. You try to hold on to the feeling. Where was I? When did this happen? Was it a dream? Did I see this place somewhere? But before you can answer, the sensation disappears, and reality becomes normal again. This is déjà vu. The phrase literally means already seen, but that translation does not fully capture the experience. Déjà vu is not simply thinking something looks familiar. It is the strange collision between two messages inside the mind. One part of you says, "This is happening for the first time." Another says, "No, this has happened before." And for a brief moment, both feel true. That contradiction is what makes déjà vu so unsettling. Because memory is one of the foundations of identity. You know where you have been, who you have met, what happened yesterday, what happened years ago. Memory creates continuity between past and present. So when your brain produces the feeling of remembering without an actual memory attached to it, something fundamental feels disturbed. It is almost like receiving the emotional signal of memory without receiving the memory itself. And this may be one of the best clues to what déjà vu actually is. To understand it, first consider something important about memory. Memory is not a video archive. Your brain does not store perfect recordings of everything that happens. Instead, memory is reconstructed. Fragments are stored. Details fade. Context changes. And whenever you remember something, the brain rebuilds the experience from available pieces. This is efficient, but it also creates strange possibilities. You can remember something incorrectly with complete confidence. You can combine details from separate events. You can recognize something without remembering where you encountered it. You can even experience familiarity without conscious recollection. Imagine seeing a face in a crowd. Immediately you think, "I know that person," but you cannot remember from where. School, work, a restaurant, online. The feeling of familiarity arrives before the source. Psychologists sometimes separate these two processes, familiarity and recollection. Familiarity is the feeling, "I have encountered this before." Recollection is the richer experience. I remember when and where. Usually they work together. You see a friend. Familiarity appears. Then memory provides the identity and history. Déjà vu may happen when familiarity activates, but recollection fails. The brain says, "known," but cannot explain why. Now imagine this happening not with one face, but with an entire moment. The room, the arrangement of objects, the movement of people, the rhythm of conversation, the emotional atmosphere. Something about the pattern resembles information stored somewhere in memory. But there is no accessible episode explaining it. So the brain produces a powerful signal, "I have been here before," without giving you the evidence. This becomes especially interesting when two environments share the same structure. Imagine visiting a house for the first time. You have never seen this exact house, but the hallway turns left in the same place as another house from your childhood. A staircase appears at a similar angle. The furniture occupies similar positions. The lighting feels familiar. Consciously, you may not recognize the resemblance, but your brain is extraordinarily good at detecting patterns. It can respond to similarity before you understand what is similar. Suddenly, déjà vu. This might explain why places can sometimes feel familiar despite being completely new. Your brain may not be recognizing the actual place. It may be recognizing the structure. This tells us something fascinating about perception. You are processing much more than you consciously notice. Right now, your brain is receiving information about shapes, distances, sounds, faces, movement, spatial relationships, body position, temperature, language, Context. Most of this does not become a conscious thought. You do not walk into a room thinking, chair 3 meters away, window on right, ceiling height approximately this, door angle 45 degrees. Your brain processes enormous amounts of information automatically. Consciousness receives only part of the result. So it is completely possible for something to influence your experience without you knowing exactly why. Déjà vu may be one of those moments where unconscious recognition becomes conscious without its source. The feeling arrives, the explanation does not. And because humans dislike unexplained feelings, the mind tries to create a story. Maybe I dreamed this. Maybe this happened in another life. Maybe I saw the future. Maybe reality repeated itself. Maybe this is a glitch. The stranger the feeling, the more dramatic the explanation can become. But before assuming something supernatural has happened, there are several possibilities worth exploring. One involves attention. Imagine entering somewhere while distracted. Maybe you glance briefly at the room while checking your phone. You technically perceive part of the environment, but attention is elsewhere. Then seconds later, you look up properly. Now the scene enters full awareness. But some information may already have been processed. The second perception could therefore carry a faint sense of familiarity. Not because you were there years ago, because some part of your brain encountered it moments earlier. The conscious experience says, first time. The processing system says, already seen. Again, two signals conflict, and déjà vu appears. There is another intriguing possibility. Your brain may sometimes be performing a kind of memory check. Imagine a system constantly asking, does this match anything I know? Normally, when something feels familiar, the brain finds the source quickly. Yes. I recognize this street because I drove here last month. I know that voice because it belongs to my teacher. I recognize that smell because my grandmother used to cook this. The loop closes. But sometimes the familiarity signal activates and the source remains missing. The brain searches. Nothing. And the search itself becomes conscious. That strange tension may be part of the déjà vu feeling. Almost like your brain saying, I know this. Wait, why do I know this? Where is the memory? It is familiarity without resolution. This might also explain why déjà vu disappears so quickly. Once the brain determines that no useful memory is available, the signal loses importance. The sensation fades. You continue with your day. But there is another strange feature. Sometimes déjà vu seems to include prediction. A person reports, I knew exactly what they were going to say next, or I knew what was around the corner, or I felt like I knew what would happen several seconds before it happened. This sounds much more mysterious, but memory itself may offer an explanation. Your brain is constantly using the past to predict the future. That is one of memory's most important functions. You remember patterns so you can anticipate what comes next. If someone throws a ball toward you, you do not calculate every detail from scratch. Your brain uses previous experience to predict the trajectory. If someone begins a familiar sentence, you can sometimes guess the final word. If you walk through a familiar type of building, you may predict where the hallway leads. Prediction is woven into perception. You are not simply receiving reality. Your brain is constantly guessing what is about to happen and updating those guesses as new information arrives. So during déjà vu, if the present moment strongly resembles some stored pattern, the brain may generate unusually strong predictions. If one happens to be correct, the effect can feel supernatural. I knew that was going to happen. But the brain may have simply recognized a pattern faster than conscious awareness could explain it. This does not rule out every mysterious interpretation anyone has ever proposed. It simply gives us a mechanism that does not require seeing the future. And it reveals something even more interesting. Maybe déjà vu feels like memory of the past, because memory and prediction are more closely connected than we normally realize. Your memory system is not only an archive, it is part of the machinery your brain uses to navigate what comes next. The past teaches the brain what patterns usually lead to what outcomes. which means when the brain activates an old pattern without giving consciousness the original memory, the result may feel like both remembering and anticipating. You recognize something, but you do not know what. You expect something, but you do not know why. Past and future momentarily blur. That might be why déjà vu creates such a strange relationship with time. For several seconds, the present does not feel new. It feels remembered. And if the present feels remembered, the next moment can feel as though it is already known. Time becomes psychologically distorted. The future seems like memory. This is one reason déjà vu appears so often in stories about simulations, alternate timelines, and glitches in reality. The sensation itself feels like a violation of ordinary time. If this is happening now, and I remember it, when did the first version happen? The mind naturally searches for an answer. But maybe there was no first version. Maybe what you are experiencing is the feeling of memory separated from an actual remembered event. And that idea is almost as strange as the paranormal explanation, because it demonstrates how much trust we place in feelings generated by the brain. If something feels familiar, we assume we must have encountered it. If something feels dangerous, we assume danger must exist. If something feels true, we often assume it is true. But feelings can be signals without perfect explanations. The familiarity of déjà vu can be real without the previous event being real. This distinction becomes even clearer when we look at false memory. Human memory can be surprisingly suggestible. People can become confident about details that were altered, remember events differently after hearing someone else's description, mix imagined and real experiences, or sometimes develop vivid memories for things that did not happen in the way they remember them. This does not mean memory is useless. Most of the time it serves us extraordinarily well, but it reminds us that confidence and accuracy are different. You can feel completely certain and still be mistaken. Déjà vu is almost a pure demonstration of this principle. Certainty appears first. Evidence never arrives. You know you have been here, except you haven't. Or at least you cannot identify when. And perhaps that is why the sensation fascinates us so much. For a few seconds, the brain exposes its own machinery. Normally, perception, memory, and familiarity blend seamlessly. You never notice that they are separate processes. During déjà vu, the pieces temporarily fall out of alignment. Familiarity says yes. Memory says, I don't know. Perception says this is happening now. And consciousness sits in the middle, wondering what just happened. This may also explain why déjà vu is difficult to study. You cannot easily schedule it. You cannot tell someone, experience déjà vu at exactly 2:15 tomorrow. It appears suddenly, then disappears. Researchers can create situations that produce similar feelings of familiarity. For example, showing environments with similar spatial layouts or exposing someone briefly to information and then presenting it again. But laboratory experiences may not perfectly reproduce the intensity of spontaneous déjà vu, because the real experience depends on subjectivity. How familiar did it feel? How long did it last? Did it include prediction? Did it feel dreamlike? Different people may be using the same phrase for experiences that are not completely identical. Déjà vu could therefore be less like one single phenomenon and more like a family of related experiences, different mechanisms producing the same strange conclusion. I've experienced this before. There is also a neurological side to the phenomenon. In some people, unusually frequent or intense déjà vu can occur in association with certain neurological conditions, including some forms of temporal lobe epilepsy. This does not mean ordinary occasional déjà vu is evidence of illness. For most people, the experience is brief and benign. But these neurological cases give researchers clues that familiarity, memory, and temporal lobe processes are involved. Again, the mystery becomes less supernatural, but no less fascinating, because the deeper question is not simply, why does déjà vu happen? It is, how does the brain decide something is familiar? We tend to think recognition works like opening a file. You see something. The brain searches memory, finds a match, then reports, "Yes, I know this." But familiarity may be faster and more intuitive than that. It may operate before detailed conscious recollection. A face can feel familiar before you know the person's name. A song can feel familiar before you remember where you heard it. A place can feel familiar before the matching memory appears. Your brain is constantly detecting resemblance, and most of the time, you never notice the process. Déjà vu may be what happens when recognition partially succeeds, enough to generate certainty, not enough to generate explanation. And this connects directly to consciousness, because consciousness is not receiving everything the brain processes. Many processes happen beneath awareness. Patterns are detected, predictions are generated, memories are activated, sensory information is filtered, then consciousness receives the result. This can create the illusion that conscious awareness did all the work. But sometimes, phenomena like déjà vu reveal that the work had already begun before you knew anything was happening. Something in the brain recognized. Then consciousness arrived and asked, "Recognized what?" This pattern appears throughout human experience. You suddenly have a bad feeling about something. You cannot explain why. Maybe your brain noticed subtle cues consciously unavailable to you. You suddenly remember someone's name after spending an hour unable to recall it. The answer seems to appear from nowhere. You wake up with a solution to a problem. Processing continued without deliberate awareness. The mind is larger than conscious attention. Déjà vu may be one of those rare moments when you can feel the boundary. Information seems to rise from somewhere behind awareness, but arrives incomplete. And that incomplete message is powerful enough to temporarily change your relationship with reality. For a moment, time feels circular. The present feels like memory. The familiar becomes impossible to explain, and your confidence in the normal order of events shakes slightly. Then it disappears. Maybe that is why people remember déjà vu experiences for years, even though the feeling lasts only seconds. It creates an unresolved question, and the brain hates unresolved questions. We want to know, where did that feeling come from? Why did I know this place? Why did I think I knew what was going to happen? Maybe one day neuroscience will explain every mechanism involved. Or perhaps what we currently call déjà vu will eventually turn out to contain several different phenomena. But even if the mystery becomes completely explained, something important will remain. Déjà vu reveals how strange memory actually is. You are not simply living in the present. Your brain is constantly comparing the present with the past and using both to predict the future. Normally, those processes are invisible. Déjà vu makes them visible for a moment. It is like watching the machinery behind reality flicker through the surface. Not necessarily a glitch in the universe. Maybe a glitch in familiarity. A moment when the brain generates the conclusion before consciousness receives the evidence. And perhaps that is why the experience feels so profound. Because for just a few seconds, you become aware that your sense of reality depends on processes you do not control and usually cannot see. You trust memory. You trust perception. You trust the feeling of familiarity. Then déjà vu quietly asks, should you? Maybe you have never lived this moment before. Maybe your brain only believes that you have. But if your brain can produce the feeling of memory without the memory itself, what else about your experience of reality begins before you become consciously aware of it? Perhaps that is the deeper mystery of déjà vu. Not whether you have lived this moment before, but how much your brain already knows, predicts, and interprets before the conscious version of you even arrives.